Part 2, Capture Attention. Lesson 4, the top 8 types of headlines. When we talk about headlines, it's important to consider this term in the widest possible sense as something that sits up top or in the front of some sort of communication. Its purpose is to capture the reader's attention and channel it into the rest of that piece of writing. So headlines in this sense consist of an email subject line, the main heading of a sales letter, article, blog post, or advertisement, the front panel of a brochure, the teaser copy on an envelope, or even a tweet where its goal is to lead the reader somewhere else. Although the main function of the headline is to pull the reader into the rest of the item, it's just as important that the headline have a reasonable relationship with the rest of the content, so that the reader doesn't feel cheated or tricked in any way by the headline. For instance, if a sales page headline read, "Are you ready for women of all ages to swoon over you?" and the page went on to discuss a new human resources online platform, that would not count as a successful headline, even if readership were high. It's also essential for a headline to appeal to the right people for what you're selling. So let's say you're promoting a course on how anyone can get more dates. The headline, "Are you ready for women of all ages to swoon over you?" would be a poor choice because it speaks to only half of your target market. I know that sounds obvious, but I've seen this kind of mistake many times. For instance, a consultant once told me she was frustrated because the only people responding to her website had really small businesses, whereas she preferred to work with companies that had annual revenues in the $2 to $5 million range. I pointed out that her homepage headline, "Low Cost and Affordable Sales and Marketing Tips for Increasing Revenue," would not appeal to that group. When she changed her homepage headline to "Businesses Earning $2 Million and Up, Reach and Keep More Customers," the problem was solved. Before we get into the main types of headlines, let me emphasize another don't. Don't assume that the name of your product, service, or event functions well as a headline. It doesn't. A name is a motionless lump that just sits there instead of inviting the reader in, arousing curiosity, promising relief, or sparking desire. For example, compare the headline on the left for a tour of Egypt, simply "Best of Egypt," with headlines for similar tours from other companies on the right. The alternate headlines are far more specific and more motivating than the bare tour title, "Best of Egypt." Let's look now at the first variety of headline, news. This might have a relatively factual, low-key tone, like legendary ad man David Ogilvy's famous Rolls-Royce headline. Or it might have a more emotional tone, like the second example, about a self-defense training program. A news headline gets the attention of the reader by announcing something or calling attention to something that the reader can get now or do. A common example of this kind of headline is, "Finally, a who's-it what's-it that does such and such." What the Rolls-Royce example shows us is that if the information you're highlighting is startling enough in itself, you don't have to inject added drama into it. Copywriters sometimes do quite a bit of interviewing, research, and thinking to come up with a news angle headline that was buried in the background material that they were given. The second type of headline typically starts with a verb and involves a command or invitation addressed to the reader. In essence, it's saying, "Do this now." It doesn't say why, yet when it's well done, the ideal customer immediately understands enough of the why to want to read on. Implicitly, there's a promise in the command or invitation, which of course needs to fit the offering. And notice the details in our sample headlines. The first doesn't say, "Learn how to get college scholarships for your child." It says, "Learn how to get guaranteed 100% funding for their college." The second doesn't say, "Start dreaming about having extra money to spend," or ask, "What would you do with extra easy cash?" Instead, the figure of an extra $30,000 or more a year makes the headline more credible and more interesting. The third invites the reader to try a service that can bring in more money, not just generally, but in 10 days. Remember, the benefit of a product or service is not the what, but the so what. In the third type of headline, you highlight what intangible goodie the buyer gets from buying. For instance, convenience, savings, exclusivity, speed, quality, privacy, making the neighbors jealous, and so on. The first example touts a legal services plan by emphasizing the peace of mind it offers. From the second headline, you don't know whether this is a high-rise apartment complex, a hotel, or a vacation rental cottage, but you do know how you're going to feel there and how quickly. And by the way, in case you were wondering, sometimes headlines are formatted with capital letters on the main words, and sometimes just a capital letter at the beginning of the headline. Both styles are acceptable. Our fourth type of headline gets attention by throwing down a gauntlet, a challenge to readers, goading them to try something or reach for something. Obviously, this won't work for every kind of product or service, but sometimes it's just the thing to hook readers who have a goal to reach or nothing better to do. The approach is, do you dare to do or try or get? Implicitly, you're inviting people to separate themselves from those who don't dare to get off the hamster wheel, for example, or ski a fearsomely treacherous trail in the second example. A quotation headline doesn't present a canned quote from Benjamin Franklin or Beyoncé. Rather, it quotes the words of someone who may or may not be named who used the product or service. And maybe it quotes the praise of a third-party expert or authority. This works best when the wording of the quote is intriguing, when it makes you want to know more. The first snippet you see is a classic headline that sold like crazy, a home study music course. Take a moment and think about why this works so well. It's certainly not about the cool features of this particular music course. Instead, it appeals to the deep human need to shine in the eyes of others, especially after being ridiculed. You can't help but identify with the unnamed person whose words appear in the headline, and they got that emotional reward because of the music course being sold. The second snippet quotes someone who's skeptical, and because of its placement at the top of a sales page, you're going to guess that the skeptic got one over. How? You need to read on to find out. With our sixth headline technique, you attract the attention of your perfect customers by naming the problem they're experiencing. Either you just call out the problem that you solve for them, or both the problem and the solution you provide for it. The first sample headline for a pest control company names the problem and implicitly empathizes with the reader experiencing it. This leads the reader into the body of the sales letter or ad explaining the company's solution and its advantages over alternatives. The second sample headline for a customer service platform, even more dramatically, names the problems that companies experience in their efforts to help customers. The third example includes a description of the problem, the solution, and the benefits of the solution. Don't be afraid to create long headlines like this, particularly on the web where you're not generally constrained for space. The next technique highlights the particular audience that the product or service is aimed at. In the first example, the target market is right there at the start in plain words: new mothers who have post-pregnancy bulges. In the second example, the reader has to do a little mental rearranging to work out that it's speaking to investment property owners who are having headaches about it. This technique of calling out the audience is really efficient because it doesn't waste the time of anyone who's not your perfect prospect. They can just go on to the next thing. This isn't for them. But anyone who is in the target market is going to read with interest, at least initially. And since the purpose of the headline is to get the right people to read on, that's mission accomplished. The last of the 8 options is to state the offer in the headline. What's the deal? In the first example, the deal is having your end of the year tax paperwork taken care of on time by someone else at no cost. You'll think if you were someone who always found this a chore. Sounds good. What's the catch? The second example is the headline for an email, postcard, or postal letter going out to established customers of a massage service, and for them, the deal is that they can refer a friend to get a free massage. And I added a third example here to make it clear that the offer doesn't need to be a freebie. It can be a special price. Now there's one type of headline excluded from my list, what I call a mystery meat headline. It's a teaser that provides few clues or no clues to what the pitch is really about. Or it tries to get attention via something that's quite irrelevant to what's being marketed. For instance, if you sent an envelope saying on the outside what never to eat on an airplane, and inside the letter was inviting you to try a new auto repair shop in your neighborhood. In general, don't go for creativity, weirdness, or mystery for its own sake. It always has to be relevant to what follows. A great place to study headlines is at the checkout counter of the supermarket. While you're waiting for your turn, look at the cover blurbs on the magazines. Teams of people spend hours tweaking these teasers for their articles. Notice what makes you curious enough to want to pick up the magazine and maybe toss it into your cart. Often there's a turn of phrase that you can insert into your next headline. For example, the ABCs of LSD. That's catchy. Dig out from college debt. The verb dig is simple but very vivid there. Or 10 things you didn't know about our watersheds. Numbers are usually helpful in headlines. Of course, you can also learn by paying attention to the headlines you see when you search Google, go to websites, and open your so-called junk mail. Before we move on, take some time out to practice with headlines. Download the PDF called Exercise 3 and see if you can create each type of headline for the product in question. Give it a good try, and then download the PDF called Exercise 3 Answers to see some possible solutions. Do that now. Then, in the next lesson, we'll discuss the element that headlines lead the reader to.